Greetings and welcome to a portmanteau of an episode of Genre Grinder. I'm your host, Gabe, and with me today is Chloe Waryan of Chloe's Not Scared. Say hello.
Hi, Gabe. Thanks you for having me.
And tell me how you know Jim, correct?
Yes, Jim and I work together. We're both librarians.
Chicago librarians.
Yes.
Today we will be talking about anthology horror films, which is something I particularly like. I am personally more into the older version of this thing, but it has really picked up over the years. And I think the streaming service horror, melange is full of these just because I think they're cheaper to make, they're easy to make quickly, and they're easy for a lot of buddy filmmakers to kind of gang up and make something together without having to or argue over scripts and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm actually writing about it for my blog, and I have kind of discovered that it seems like the newer anthology horrors don't really have a linking story, which makes me think they just kind of took a bunch of short films that already existed
Mm-hmm.
and put them around a theme, and maybe created like a through line linking that didn't actually link the plots of all of them. But I'm with you, Gabe. I like the older stuff much better.
Yeah, I also noticed that there was a brief period when DVD first picked up where there was a bunch of cheap anthology or portmanteau horror movies. So I think it was the same thing where there was just like a new distribution model, and this is an easy way to get something out.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do remember that too. I don't have much of a relationship with the newer stuff like VHS, but
Right.
I know it has cult followings.
Yeah. And a lot of the DVD ones, I honestly couldn't tell you a single one. Chillerama. I thought of one. I thought I couldn't think of a single one. Chillerama, just sort of, yeah, they kind of disappeared. I don't know if they're any good or bad. I don't remember anything about them, which is kind of sad. But yeah, so we're going to mostly talk about older things. At the very end here, we're going to talk about a newer movie if we can fit it in. But the thing that makes this podcast a challenge, even though we're technically only going to talk about 3 or 4 movies, is each one of those movies has 3 or 4 or more parts to it. So we're actually kind of covering a dozen movies. So I'm going to have to describe the plots of a whole bunch of stuff in a row. And so I'm hoping we don't overstay our welcome here. And I have a feeling that we're going to glaze over some of the less successful. I'm going to call them episodes most of the time. I don't know what your preferred naming convention is.
I don't think I have a preferred,
Okay.
so episodes is fine by me.
However we go with it, yeah, the parts of the short.
Yeah.
And then the ones we picked, I of course was tempted to do Mario Bava's Black Sabbath
One of
because
my favorites of all
yeah,
time.
it's a great movie. I'm a huge Bava fan, but I realized that we already talked about a lot of Mario Bava stuff when I did episodes with Patrick, so I decided to leave it off. And then the other thing is that there were so many foreign language options that I felt like maybe we should just save some of those for a completely separate podcast down the road. So that this was my executive decision. So if you find the picks boring, blame me, not Chloe. Um, so yeah, we're gonna stick to English language ones, two of which are British, and yeah, someday down the line we'll dig into to some of the Indian, Mexican, Spanish, Italian. Maybe we'll do the Spanish or the Italian language version of Black Sabbath, which is like almost a different movie than the English language version. So something like that down the line. Then the last thing is I want to mention that, as per usual, IMDb and Wikipedia account for a lot of what my research, because I'm just sort of looking things up lazily. But I did look through Nightmare Movies by Kim Newman and the British horror film From the Silent to the Multiplex by Ian Fryer for a little bit more stuff on the first 2 movies in particular, which have quite a bit of information on Wikipedia and IMDb, but there was just a couple I just thought I should check in for context's sake, look into that stuff. So I recommend those 2 books, since this is a librarian episode.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. I looked at Wikipedia and newspapers.com because
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated with how these movies were received at the time.
That's a new thing for me too. I didn't used to, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But there was a commentary track I listened to recently where there wasn't a lot of information on the movie, so the commentator was reading off old reviews from the newspapers, and it was actually quite interesting.
It's so fascinating. I mean, it really shows like there are some movies. Well, I'll let you know when we get to it, but our third movie that we're discussing had more positive reviews than the John Carpenter movie playing alongside it.
Wow.
So, really really interesting stuff.
Yeah, cool. So, okay, well, we'll get started, and we're gonna start not at exactly the beginning, but towards the beginning here with Dead of Night from 1945. This is directed by several people. Some of these are directed by one guy, some are directed by multiple people. This is, and I'm gonna slaughter these names probably: Alberto Cavalcanti, Charles Crichton, Basil Drearden, which is a more familiar name, and Robert Hammer or Hammer. And I want to make it clear that we're discussing the 1945 British film, not the 1977 made for TV horror anthology by Dan Curtis, which is also called Dead of Night, or Bob Clark's Death Dream, which has an alternate title of Dead of Night. We talked about Death Dream on the Bill Ackerman or Ackerman. See, I just did it. The Bill Ackerman podcast, the first one I did with him.
Mhm.
This is one of the first marked anthology horror films, and some people, like some books, will say it is the first, but I think that there are quite a few films that I would say predate it. There's Fritz Lang's Destiny, which is mostly a horror movie from 1921. Leo Berinsky's and Paul Lenny's. Paul Lenny also made Waxworks from 1924, which is sort of a portmanteau. And there's a movie I've never seen by John M. Totman from 1943, just before this, called Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. Keep that name in mind. And then there was one called Flesh and Fantasy by Julian Duvier, which I have also not seen, but it sounds by all accounts to be the same thing as a definite portmanteau.
Mhm.
And then the only other one I thought of that I think kind of counts, because it kind of counts as a million things, is the 1922 film Haxan, the witchcraft pseudodoc thing.
Yes. I
I
was
think that
wondering if
counts.
that, yeah, if you would call that an anthology. I think so. I mean,
Yeah,
it's also like a documentary mockumentary
right. And
too,
so
but
it's a whole bunch of, it's way ahead of its time in a lot of ways. This is also an important horror movie because it was the only horror, well, one of the only horror films released in the UK during World War II, which was a time that the government didn't really want people watching horror movies, understandably.
yeah.
Uh, and it's generally credited as the movie that kicked off the British horror revival, which really would kick into gear in the 50s with Hammer and Amicus, who we're going to talk about later. But this a lot of the Hammer and Amicus stuff was sort of inspired by the success of this film.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So most of these have, I think all of these have a framing story. Yes, all of these have a framing story. And this one is sort of like it becomes kind of a template for other stories. It begins with a man traveling to a mysterious farmhouse. They also call it a cottage, where he meets an odd group of people with their own scary stories to tell. A country cottage is the other thing he refers to it as. And it's so mundane that it becomes kind of remarkable, considering how many British horror films revolve around spooky castles or mansions, crumbling mansions, that this is like a pleasant rural getaway. It's basically an inn.
Yeah, I've seen this movie a million times. It is like one of my
Mhm.
gateway horrors, one of my favorites. But watching it for this podcast, I wrote down, why are they all gathered? I don't even
Yeah.
know. A luncheon or something? It's in the middle of the day or even like late morning. I'm not really sure, but you're right. It's just some person's house.
Yeah, it seems like to me that it's some sort of bed and breakfast or something, but that's not really clear either.
Yeah.
It's the spooky location, and like so in later movies, the spooky location is a cave or a haunted house or something like that. No, it's just this pleasant little house. The man who we follow, Mr. Craig, who's played by Renee God or Gad. not good with French names either. He claims he has already lived this experience in his dreams and knows what everyone there is going to say and everything that's going to happen. And it all kind of seems charming at first, but like as an audience in a movie called Dead of Night, we know it's probably not a good thing that he knows all this stuff. And the other part of the framing device that I think is interesting is that it has this ongoing theme of psychoanalysts.
Yes, that I think that is ahead of its time.
Way, way ahead of its time. Like I can't imagine like that must have been like the impetus of the whole thing is that one of these writers was going through I think that it was just a thing in the 40s that it was kind of a new idea that psychoanalysis and psychiatry was all kind of picking up as an idea, and it would really come out in the late 50s and 60s, after the war. So yeah, it's ahead of its time as far as that goes. And I mean, it is an ongoing theme throughout the whole thing. There's a guy named Dr. Van Straten, played by Frederick Valk, who is attempting to explain all the precognition and dream logic of the stories that these people tell.
It's also, I noticed, within the content of all of their stories, too. I
Yeah.
mean, like, we'll get into it, but Sally in the Christmas party goes over kind of the stereotypes of a ghost and to acknowledge how silly she's being for being afraid.
Hmm.
And there's in the mirror story, the wife kind of makes the husband face his fears literally. So it's present in all of them, and of course in the last one as well.
And I mean, like, if I was a smarter person, I would say that this has something to do with the fact that the country is at war and constantly stressed out. Um, but I can't make those connections exactly. I don't know if I want to go that far.
Maybe. I mean, I have read a lot of stories around that time, at least, in fictional stories of people fleeing to the countryside.
Right, like Chronicles of Narnia,
Yes.
basically. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's one of them. Yep.
Okay, well then, so the first story, well, okay, I'll say this is the one directed by Druden, and it is written by E.F. Benson, and these two also directed the framing device. And this is based on The Bus Conductor, which was a story Benson himself wrote, which was published in Pall Mall magazine in 1906. And it was adapted to a 1961 episode of The Twilight Zone called 22. And this man is a race car driver played by Antonio Baird, survives a serious accident and spends all this time in the hospital with delirium and a high fever. And while on the mend, he sees a horse-drawn hearse outside his window, and the driver smiles at him and says, "Just room for one more inside, sir." And then he returns home, like time goes by, and later on, this one goes really fast.
Yes.
Later on, like I guess months down the road, he is confronted by the exact same man saying the exact same thing on a bus, and he opts not to get in the bus, and the bus crashes and everybody dies.
This is like an urban legend. Like, I remember
Yeah.
this. I don't know if I had seen the Twilight Zone episode prior to watching this movie, but I've always just kind of associated like room for one more with an urban legend.
Yeah, I don't think I've never seen this particular Twilight Zone episode. I'm not like a Twilight Zone nut. I'm the kind of guy who catches it on TV in the middle of the night at a hotel. Kind of
Hmm.
that's my knowing. Yeah, there's not super a lot to say here other than this is sort of a setup to sort of relate to the doctor that there could be precognition because I had this thing happen to me. And I mean that's about, yeah, it's really just a setup, and there's a not terribly convincing model of the sort of bus crash, but I mean it's an early attempt at a morbid twist, so I think that audiences at the time probably bought into the
Yeah,
crash.
we'll give it a
Even it
pass.
Yeah. I'm guess
1945.
yeah, I'm guessing they were shocked enough that it didn't matter, that it kinda looked like a toy, kinda.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that the, obvious connection here would be to the Final Destination movies.
Oh, yeah. Well, you say obvious. I didn't even think of
Oh,
that. I
well, I think about them a lot. They're
Yeah. Okay. I rarely think about them. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. And also it shows how this character met his wife because she was the nurse and then she comes
Right,
in, right? Like to the cottage afterwards too.
right.
It's a meet cute.
It's a meet cute, and it's a near death experience followed by a meet cute followed by a near death experience.
Yeah.
I think the Final Destination thing, I would not be surprised if that was on purpose, because the guys who wrote and directed Final Destination were X Files regulars, and X Files owes a lot to the Twilight Zone. So I would not be surprised if that was not a coincidence.
Oh yeah. Yeah, me neither.
But maybe they saw this and they're like, yeah, but what happened if Death got pissed off that you didn't get on the bus? And then they went from there.
Put
Um,
you at a quiet little party where
yeah,
where we're all going to share our dreams.
yeah. Well, and that's interesting too, because if it was a Final Destination movie, then all those people would die really elaborately, and
Exactly. Yeah.
that's not what happens. There's no Rube Goldberg devices in this movie.
Exactly.
Uh, but that, yeah. So that's the hearse. And unless, do you have anything else on this part?
No, but I think it's a good first story to kind of set
Yeah.
the scene. It's one of the shorter ones, as you said. It's yeah, it has some special effects. Yeah, it's a good first.
So then we move on to the Christmas party, which you alluded to. This is the Cavalcanti episode, and it was based on an original story by Agnes McPhail. And this is partially based on a true story.
I read about this too. I
And the
didn't
part
know.
and it's really vague. But I'll say that the like the title implies, this takes place during a Christmas party, and a group of children play this weird version of hide and seek where only one of them hides, and every time a seeker finds them, that seeker has to hide with them. It's almost like a reverse hide and seek.
We called it sardines. I definitely played this as a kid.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I've never played this one. And the young Sally, played by Sally Ann Howes, ends up following this kind of creepy boy named Jimmy, who is clearly an adult, not a boy, which is something I love about older movies. And they have a really line heavy role, and they don't want to stick a kid in the role, so they just find a sort of creepily childlike adult to fill the role.
Exactly. And she like this is not a meet cute. She is
No,
avoiding this man. She
yeah.
does not want to be alone with him.
And he sort of takes her into the attic and shares the story of a murder that occurred in the mansion, and she ditches him, wanders deeper into the attic, finds a playroom where she finds a crying boy, and she sings him a lullaby, helps him go to sleep, and then the shocker is that little boy was a ghost of the murdered child, which is a very urban legendy kind of thing. And he was dead all along, that kind of, big shocker. But apparently the true story that it's very vaguely based on was there's 1860 murder of Francis Savell Kent. His half sister Constance Kent was convicted of killing him, and she served 20 years. She was released, immigrated to Australia, where she died at the age of 100 in 1944, the year before this movie was released, which is
Wow.
just one of those weird factoids that doesn't really mean anything, but it's like, damn, she missed it by a year. But they just sort of vaguely mention that that's the murder that they've based the attic killing on.
Yeah, this story is also familiar was also familiar to me because there's a story that's extremely similar by A.M. Burridge called Smee. Have you read this at
I have
all?
not. No, no.
Oh man, so you can find it online. It's very old. And though it doesn't have like the murderous ghost aspect, it's very similar and very very like Victorian vibey kind of Christmas party sardines, etc.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for Victorian ghost stories with Alice in Wonderland like girls. I just did an episode that we called Blank in Wonderland about stories of adolescence
I
ending up in a.
loved that episode, by the way. I
Oh,
listened to
thank
that.
you.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. And so this sort of fits that so I really I could do like a full movie on this kind of thing that was just all vibes. It does feel a little rushed in this context. There's
Yeah.
not a lot of time to get, oh my god, they were dead all along. Like, it's just sort of the end.
Exactly. This one is my favorite. I'm not sure if it's because I saw it when I was a young girl and I
Hmm.
related to Sally, but it's still I'm also a sucker for Victorian ghost stories, and
Hmm.
yeah, this one takes the cake. And our next one.
Yeah, the haunted mirror. This is the Hammer or Hammer, Robert Hammer. I'm going to say Hammer. I'm just going to say Hammer because no one told me otherwise. This is also an original story by John Baines. This is told by a socialite type woman, which is a theme that might come up again later, named Joan Cortland. She's played by Googie Withers, who is this sort of
What a
steel.
great name, by the way.
Yeah,
Sorry to
Googie.
interrupt.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and she steals every scene, and I'm like, well, sorry, I haven't seen her in more movies, but she had a huge career, and the highlight I knew was Lady Vanishes, the Hitchcock movie, which it comes up again in a minute here. It's kind of this movie is almost a semi sequel to the Lady Vanishes, based on how many actors they have in common.
Wow. I never thought about that, but that makes sense. I love The Lady Vanishes.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite of those really early Hitchcocks. And her final acting appearance was in the Oscar-nominated the 1996 film Shine, which I remember being the movie that kind of introduced international audiences to Jeffrey Rush.
Oh, interesting and relevant. He's in
Yeah.
a new one right now.
But so she buys her fiance Peter, who's played by another movie that comes up a lot, A Night to Remember's Ralph Michael. So yeah, there's a lot of A Night to Remember and Lady Vanishes connections in these shorts for some reason. I think maybe it has to do with Ealing Studios or something. But she buys him an antique mirror that somehow reflects a different room back at him, which is a hard thing to describe without you seeing it. But I think that I'm making sense referring to it like that. And he tries to put it out of his mind, but it slowly drives him mad. And she makes him confront it, and everything seems cool for a little while, but the visions return. And so she goes and investigates what the deal is here, and discovers that it was owned by a man who killed his wife and slit his own throat while peering into it. So the mirror is sort of like haunted by the crime. And when she gets back home, he accuses her of adultery, tries to attack her, and she has to break the mirror to stop it. Which I like the fact that the cool woman was solving the crime and also saved the guy from the problem. It wasn't like a third. It seems like a lot of movies like this would have a third party man come in and fix the problem for them.
Yes. Yeah, the women in these films are not or these episodes are not stereotypes, and they have agency and they tell their own stories, and I very much appreciate that. But again, another story that allows characters to confront their own fears, face their fears literally,
Mhm.
and another romance, strangely, because they're not
Yeah,
married at the start of the episode, and I
that's
think
right.
they end up getting married, and then once they are married, then he begins his murderous tendencies.
Right, because I guess they have to be officially married for it to be adultery.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't think of it that way, but yeah. When they go back to the farmhouse, relating of this story is the point that Dr. Van Straten starts to get annoyed with everyone, constantly asking him to explain things to them. And I kind of like, I don't know if this was intended, but I like that he seems like kind of a dickhead who's like trying to explain away everyone's problems at the beginning. But as the movie goes on, it's like, guys, like leave him be. He doesn't need this anymore. Oh, and so then in the original American release, the Ghost Girls story, sorry, the Christmas story, and the next one, the Golfers story, were both cut.
Oh.
And
Oh,
it wasn't
yeah. I do remember that. I
and it
remember
wasn't for
reading that.
content. It wasn't like they were shocking or something. It was just because the studio wanted a shorter distributor wanted a shorter movie. And weirdly, it actually makes a difference because there is an overarching plot of this one. Whereas normally you could just sort of trim any episode out of a portmanteau, and especially newer ones, and no one would be the wiser.
Yeah, this is why I like Dead of Night so much, because each story makes a difference. Each story relates to the story next, relates to the framing device. You said it's the golfing story and the Christmas party got
Yeah,
cut.
yeah.
Okay, well,
So the
I'm not happy about the Christmas party, but the golfing story is fine by
yeah,
me.
well,
That's my
and so
least
yeah,
fave.
the golfers story, and ongoing theme here that will happen. in most of the movies we're going to be talking about, is there's always one funny one, and it's usually towards the middle or towards the end. I guess it's to like kind of relax the audience before, you want to put your scariest one at the end to leave them shuddering as they leave the theater. So I think the idea is that you let them relax a little with a silly one. This is directed by Charles Crichton, who I looked into it and is not related to the Jurassic Park guy.
Oh, thank
I
you for doing that work.
I was like, maybe he might be a son of a British person, but no, no relation. And this is based on a short story called "The Story of the Inexperienced Ghost" by H.G. Wells, which makes it one of the few stories that people might have just sort of happened upon. Because I feel like Wells is republished so often that I could see this just being something people knew. This one story.
Hmm.
It's two golfers, George and Larry, fall in love with the same woman, and instead of just becoming a polycule, which seems the natural choice given how comfortable they are around each other,
Right? Exactly. I wrote the same thing.
they have this really pleasant group dynamic in this scene where they're like, well, only one of us can marry you, and they all seem really disappointed by that
Oh,
fact.
yeah, and the girl's, like, totally down. Like,
Yeah,
"Sure, yeah, you can play golf for me, that's fine."
yeah, they play golf to win her hand. And George wins by cheating. And Larry walks into a lake and drowns himself to little fanfare. And that's where, I mean, you're really, oh, okay, this is a comedy. And sometime later, George is haunted on the links by Larry, who uses ghostly powers to make him suck at golf. Very cartoony stuff, like moving the ball around. And he'll say he'll only stop haunting him if he leaves Mary and quits golf. And George is more upset about the golf than leaving Mary, which he cheated. He's a golf cheater. So this story is very concerned with the value of golf over
Yeah.
everything else. He agrees to this, but Larry doesn't know how to go back to the afterlife. So they end up in a throuple anyway, because Larry's just permanently uh, haunting George, and only George can see him, but he can't. I think it's to say 6 feet. He can't get without 6 feet. And so the 1945 way of trying to make the joke that he will see them having sex is that George and Mary go in the bedroom, and Larry will disappear, and then they'll come back out of the bedroom together. So that's as close as they get to saying he's seeing them have sex, and it's awkward for everyone involved.
Exactly, yeah. This is my least favorite story.
Yeah,
It's not that it's bad, I just personally am not a golf fan. If I wanted, like, a funny hijinks ghost story, I would watch, Ghost and Mr. Chicken or something like that.
right.
But at the end, we learn he's kind of making it all up. Like, when we're
Yeah,
back to the cottage, it makes sense that it doesn't fit, quote unquote, with the rest of the stories as the humorous one because it's not real. But
yeah.
so he says.
The characters Larry and George are Basil Radford and Naughton Wayne, and these are in reference to characters that they played in The Lady Vanishes, where that movie is kind of a little bit famous because the two characters are considered by a lot of people to be a gay couple.
I can see that. Thank you again. Like, thank you for doing so much research. This is why
Oh,
I love your podcast.
it's the part that makes it fun for me.
That's
I've got
wonderful.
So yeah, but they're not playing the exact same guys, but they basically are playing the same guys. And they play the same characters again in Carol Reed's Night Train to Munich. That's the one example where they're literally playing the same guys, but they're in like a dozen films as a duo. I think this one might have worked if like Howard Hawks was directing it and it was a full on screwball comedy.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's not particularly funny the way it's presented, and it's sort of it feels rushed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It,
It
it,
needs
it
more
I,
time.
I suppose now that I'm thinking about it, it does feel like a joke someone would tell in mixed company at a pub or something. So
Hmm.
that kind of works. They would just be dirtier.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like the parallels between like learning how to haunt, like a ghost
Mhm.
learning how to haunt and an athlete learning how to golf. Like
Yeah,
he's not good at haunting yet. He has to
right.
practice, he has to hone his craft. I think that's probably the most interesting part. But again, yeah, it makes sense that they're like the duo that we have to see that will draw people to the theater. But then, the American audiences maybe were less familiar. So makes sense that they cut it.
So then that leads into the one that is the most famous part of this, which is the ventriloquist's dummy. I think, yeah, most of the time when you read about this movie in particular, this is the one that comes up because it was kind of a harbinger of killer doll movies. And it definitely inspired the better known to most people Anthony Hopkins film Magic from 1978, which is a sort of remake of this story.
Hmm.
But there was a novel of the same name that, yeah, this was weird. The novel Magic was, the author said, inspired in part by this movie. So it wasn't like there was one novel that both movies were inspired by. It was that there was a movie, then a novel, and then a movie. I thought that was kind of cool. It's not the first uncanny doll movie though. There's a 1929 movie called The Great Gabbo, but that doll is not a killer. He's just eerie. So this is, I think, the first killer doll movie.
Okay.
Um, and this is also directed by Cavalcanti, who did The Haunted Mirror and Christmas Party, or who did Christmas Party, and it's written by Barnes, who wrote The Haunted Mirror. This is the doctor's story. So this is the doctor relating to everyone else his story of the uncanny and weird. He has a criminal patient named Maxwell, who is a very talented, popular ventriloquist. It has to be the 40s if there's such thing as a popular ventriloquist. Well, I suppose there's that one really unfunny comedian that people like, and I don't remember his name. He's okay, so maybe ventriloquism is still kind of popular in the world today, but not, it's not the same as it would have been in the 40s.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
He is Sylvester Key. He's portrayed by Hartley Power, no relation to my family. Where, yeah, the S makes a difference, so from the Irish part of the island. There are a number of flashbacks within story frames, which I found interesting because I always feel that's something that they tell you in writing school to never do. And I see it all the time. And it honestly usually works to a certain
Yes,
degree.
I
And so
agree.
why do they tell people not to do that? But somebody who was a famous teacher at some point decided that was the way we had to do things, and that's the way that stuff happens.
Probably boring if you ask me, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But the dummy is named Hugo, and he seems to have a mind of his own, and he wants to work with this other guy, Key. And when Key visits the dressing room, Max and Hugo appear to have like a real fight. I don't think I'm making it clear. Max is the ventriloquist, Hugo's the dummy, Key is the other ventriloquist. He's an American.
And we
And then,
never see his dummy.
yeah, we never see him doing his thing. We just hear that he's also very good at it.
Yeah.
And he's game for everything. He's actually very supportive. He's not an antagonist. And Max's life falls to pieces, and Key tries to help him. And then thinking that because Hugo apparently can move on his own, or maybe not, we don't know. Max shoots Key, who then we learn later survives. And in prison, Max kills Hugo by smothering him, which is funny because it's a dummy, and then he crushes his head. And then when Key visits, he finds that Max is in a basically vegetative state, but that his personality and Hugo have flipped. That's the twist at the end.
Hmm.
And so this his particular story could all be explained away by psychosis. Like there's only thing that happens that, well, we never see Hugo move on his own. So it could be that Max, he could have been the one who hid Hugo inside Key's room. Like Hugo might not actually exist. He might just be with a personality within Max, which is that's the deepest of the psychiatry part of this movie, is the idea that you can, this is pre-Psycho, which made that popular.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
we see that Max is unwell. As
Hmm. Yeah.
he has a bad drinking problem.
Yeah.
He has trouble, differentiating like Key being nice to him or trying to poach his act, which
Hmm.
again, like, yeah, Key is so friendly.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a nice guy.
You would never see that in a
Even after he
movie
gets, even after he gets
nowadays.
shot, even after he gets shot, he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna go try to help this man who shot me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this one is very scary.
Hmm.
I do think the ventriloquist. I'm not like a haunted doll person. I don't really
No,
find that
me neither.
subgenre very scary, but yeah, the ventriloquist dummy. He whispers to Max, "Temper, temper." Do you remember this? I just get
Yeah.
chills every time I see this. And of course, this one is like the face of the movie, the whole
Hmm.
movie.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
Michael Redgrave was a pretty big star at the time, I think. So he, I think, is the biggest worldwide star in the whole movie, on top of everything else.
Makes sense that they left it to the
Yeah,
end. If I were at that cottage luncheon, though, I would say to the psychiatrist, "You guys were holding out on me. This one
yeah.
is the scariest."
I think as a comic book reader, I wonder if this was the inspiration behind the Batman villain Scarface and the ventriloquist. Scarface is basically a dummy who is a gang leader and who is like a good strategist, but he can't function without his ventriloquist. And so the question in the comics is always, does Scarface exist outside of the ventriloquist? It seems like the kind, I don't know, they don't say anything like on the Scarface wiki about, they just say, oh, he was named after a fucking Al Capone, which yeah, no shit.
Oh, of
Um,
course, yeah, yeah,
they don't say it as inspiration, but I mean, I think the timing would probably line up. Uh,
yeah. Probably. I feel like this really did set the precedent for evil ventriloquist dummies
yeah,
in
yeah. I
horror.
mean, there's not that many of them, but they're there.
They're there for sure.
There's a weird movie called Pin, which is not a ventriloquist dummy, but a anatomical dummy that is talking to children. It's weird movie. I don't know if it's ever got a Blu-ray release. I remember seeing it years ago.
I've never seen it, but I've seen the poster, and I
Yeah,
know what you're talking about.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the movie ends and it reveals that this really was all Craig's dream or nightmare, and he awakens and is invited to visit the farmhouse, which begins the cycle all over again. Which is a thing that you see a lot these days, but probably was a pretty clever, spooky twist. The last couple of bits of trivia I have here for this one is that the astronomers Fred Howell and Thomas Gold and Herman Bondi, they were inspired by the framing device, the circular plot, to the steady state theory of the universe, which is or was, I don't know if this is one of those things that people still look into. Like, I don't know if it's like string theory where it's mostly been thrown by the wayside, but it's sort of an alternative to the Big Bang theory, where the universe has always existed in a sort of circular thing. And so it's one of those like thought processes that can't be disproven, but that helps researchers learn things. So it was inspired by this particular movie.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So no,
It-
the theory was inspired by
yeah.
the movie?
Yeah, they went to the movie and they saw it, and they apparently then were having a discussion. They're like, "What if that was true?" And so I think it's less. I'm under the impression it's less that they think this is true, and more than, well, proving if this was true or not would help us do other things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think a lot of theories are set up like that, where we aren't sure if this is a real thing, but what if it was? How would you prove it and disprove it? And that will help us prove and disprove other things.
Hmm. Interesting.
And then the other thing I learned from one of those books I read is that Elizabeth Welch's character is the singer and dancer in the club where Max and Hugo work. She kind of seems to be almost in charge. She's not necessarily their boss, but she kind of is a boss. She's considered a major breakthrough for Black women in movies. Her biographer, Stephen Bourne, claims that, quote, this was the first time a Black woman was portrayed as independent, successful, resourceful, and had an important part in the plot. And that the original poster, she actually got billing alongside people like Michael Redgrave.
Oh, amazing. That's great. I
Yeah.
always assumed that she owned the club.
Yeah,
So,
I think I was not clear on that, but she does seem kind of like the boss.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
she sings a song. So,
Yeah.
and it's a good song. It gets stuck in my head all the time.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite of the episodes?
It's probably the ventriloquist one, just because it's kind of got that noir edge to it. I kind of like the idea of a scary noir story,
I can
and
see
just
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a little ahead of its time, that kind of thing. The whole thing's a little ahead of its time.
Yeah. It's the scariest one, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
And actually, I realized after I watched it that Patrick and I did the 101 actual scariest movie moments as a kind of joke podcast, sort of serious, sort of joke. And he actually picked the scene from the ventriloquist thing as one of his picks. I think yeah, number 61 of 101. I
Wow.
completely forgot that he did that
That's
until I was
awesome.
rewatching it. I'm like, oh yeah,
I will say when the dummy starts walking, I'm kind of out.
yeah.
It's just
Well,
like,
that's
yeah,
I don't think it actually happens. That's the thing with me, is that it's like I think that this one really is all in the guy's head, and that
yeah.
he is haunted by himself. And also, this is coming to 4K UHD, probably just a little bit after. I think I don't know when I'm going to put this live, but it'll probably be a month or two after I put this live. It's getting a big update from Kino Lorber. I was like,
Amazing.
oh, I should buy that, but it's not available yet. So
I need an update. I got this less than legal means back in the early 2000s.
mhm.
Showed it to my friends, still have it
It's on
burned on
Canopy.
DVD.
Speaking of libraries, it's on Canopy. That's how I watched it. If anybody out there has a library card, I know in Minnesota, the St. Paul, the Ramsey County cards don't work, so I got a Hennepin County card, and you can hook it up to it's a streaming service called Canopy, and you get a certain number of things you can take out. It's like a library, and it has a lot of older films and art films and foreign films. So I watched it without commercials on Canopy. It was really, and it's a decent looking. It was a little scratched up, but it's an old movie. So
I love Canopy so much. Chicago
yeah.
Public Library doesn't have it,
Okay.
but Hennepin County did, and my old library, Iowa City Public Library, did. They have a ton of Criterion Collection stuff on
Yes, they
there,
do.
and it's Canopy with a K for anyone who
Yes.
wants it.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point. I should, yeah, point out that it's Canopy with a K. Any other thoughts on this one before we move on?
Just that I love it, and I'm really
Hmm.
happy to talk about it with someone who also likes it.
Yeah, yeah. It was good. I'd only seen parts of it. Actually, where I saw it was, I think it was a Martin Scorsese documentary, because he really likes it.
Yeah, it's always in his top like 5 or 10
Yeah.
movies, horror movies, what have you.
So I think it was, I'd seen scenes from that in particular. Okay, well then let's move on to Doctor Terror's House of Horrors, which is the title I mentioned earlier. That is an unrelated movie. This is not a remake of that movie. This is a movie that just stole that movie's title. And it's funny because the doctor is named Dr. Shrek, not Dr. Terror.
I was wondering about that.
um, this is 1965. And this is, so 20 years later. This is directed by Freddie Francis, who is probably the top two or three filmmakers to come out of Hammer Studios, behind Terrence Fisher and
Hmm.
maybe Roy Ward Baker. It is written by Amicus Studio co-founder Milton Sabatsky. Don't tell Jim I'm so bad with Polish
Polish
last name.
names. Yeah, I am too. And I live in Chicago. I have no excuse, but
Yeah, they just reused the title. Has nothing really to do with the other one. And they were specifically, from according to Stabatsky, they were trying to recreate Dead at Night. They saw Dead at Night and they said, "Hey, maybe we could do that for the modern era, because we're not going to be able to out Hammer Studios, so we need to do something different." So the story behind Amicus, as quickly as I can get it, is after briefly collaborating with American John Llewellyn Moxie on City of the Dead, which was one Patrick and I also talked about on our horror films of 1960. He was still trying to break in to the teen musical market, and that was dying. And so Stabatsky and Max J. Rosenberg, who are both also Americans, returned to Britain to make Amicus Studios, and they distinguished themselves specifically by making contemporary set horror movies at a time when Hammer was still mostly making period pieces. And they're special to me because there's plenty of good Amicus films, but their Portmanteau series is, like, I have it on my shelf all next to each other, like in its own little area, because they are fantastic. This is the first of the series. It was followed by Francis made The Torture Garden. Peter Dufell made The House That Dripped Blood. Francis made Tales from the Crypt, which is probably the best known and best one
Yes.
overall.
Yeah, I would agree.
And Roy Ward Baker, they poached another guy from Hammer. He made Asylum, which is probably my second favorite. And then Baker made Vault of Horror, and the last one was Kevin Conner's From Beyond the Grave. This is my third favorite in the series, but I wanted to cover the first one just to sort of set it up.
I'm
Um,
glad you did. I'm glad you picked this one because we so easily could have done Tales from the Crypt. I think I suggested it, but it
yeah,
is this is where it all begins, as you said, and it is just so British, and they're figuring it out, and you can tell.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's not. That's not to say it's like bad or hastily made or what have you.
You can see one big thing you can see is the bookending device that they do is very similar to. It's practically the same as the one they do in Tales from the Crypt, actually, as far as its function, because it's a guy named Dr. Shrek, played by Peter Cushing, who must have been a great git for the studio, who's always good in every single thing he's ever appeared in. Is one of, over the years became basically my all time favorite actors.
Me too. Me too. He
He
looks
can
exactly like my dad, which is so strange.
interesting.
I would not be surprised if we're distantly related.
I always say he is one of the best hair actors in the world. You can tell his mental state by the state of his hair.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to look at that. Yes, I agree.
But so he's a tarot reader, and he tells all these prophetic stories with tarot cards to the guys around him and the coach. In Tales from the Crypt, it's a bus breaks down and some people go into a cave just to waste time and have a crypt keeper tell them stories about it. And in both cases, the twist is that they're already dead. There's been an accident and they're already dead, and they're just learning about how their lives would end, which is funny because they don't all die at the end of each story, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
And then the one other thing, and with the risk of going on too long, I think the other thing we have to set up is that Amicus portmanteaus were inspired, yes, by Dead of Night, but also by the American anthology comics series from EC, which included stuff like Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror, both which were directly adapted for Amicus film. They actually took stories from the comics and adapted them. And they had other ones called Shock Suspense Stories, all one word, Haunt of Fear, and Weird Science. I had a collection of these recently, and they are dated, but they are really shockingly violent for their time. For the mid 50s, the art is spectacular across the board, and they were a big thing in inspiring the moral panic, the comic moral panic that led to the comics code. You know, the thing of their time, and in my childhood it was heavy metal music. More recent people, it was video
Video
games.
games. Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, this was comic books were what was ruining children. um, but they also, these stories themselves tended to be very clear cut morality plays, was always the
Hmm.
other part that I think the people, they just saw the violence, but they're to the point where they're almost like eye rolling with the morality plays that go into them. Bad people get ironically punished for being bad people. Amicus is not quite doing that yet at this point.
No, but I think the morality is still there, and it was a huge trend at this time across the board, but especially in horror anthologies. Yeah, Tales from the Crypt is pretty much they play around with the morality tale
Yeah, yeah,
aspect.
they're definitely ironic, and people die because they're bad people.
Yeah.
And of course, there was pop nostalgia for baby boomers because HBO made a TV series in the '80s called Tales from the Crypt, which is how people my age, you know, Gen X, early millennials, I think a lot of us got understood what anthology horror was, because I don't think there were that many anthology horror movies in the late '80s when I was actually old enough to watch these things. Uh, Cat's Eye.
Cat's Eye, maybe the uncanny.
Yeah,
Um,
and the big one is Creep Show,
yeah.
which we're going to talk about later. Yeah, I guess Creep Show was on TV all the time, but I think a lot of the Tales from the Crypt was a thing that got me to understand it. I can't remember. We didn't have HBO. I think they played censored ones on USA Network or something.
Mhm.
But yeah, so not going in too much further. If you have any interest in these EC comics, which is, I guess, entertainment comics, there are plenty of books and documentaries on the subject that are all pretty good. And you can find reprints and digital editions of most of them. There's a pretty recent digital releases of the sets, as far as it would be like Vault of Horror set, a Tales from the Crypt set, a Suspense Stories set, so on. But
Amazing. You are a wealth of knowledge.
I just like I actually think that the history behind the Tales the EC comics is almost better than the comics. It's just like it's a really weird time. All these moral panics. I just watched the heavy metal horror movie Trick or Treat for review,
Mm,
and the whole idea that backwards, backmasking evil satanic lyrics and all that satanic panic stuff. It's very fascinating. It's not fun when you're living in it, though. I feel like we have a version of that going on right now.
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but maybe we'll look back on it and find it fascinating later on. I don't know.
I hope so. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and hopefully good art comes of it, but of course I wish it
Mhm.
wasn't happening at all.
Exactly. So, okay, so the first story is just called Werewolf, which is really uncreative
Yes,
of them.
very boring. Yes.
An architect named Jim, played by Neil McCollum, travels to make alterations to an old home at the request of the new owner. And while investigating the foundation, he discovers a mysterious coffin that's been plastered into the wall. Within the coffin is the body of Count Cosmo Valdemar, who is, as the title indicates, a werewolf. And Jim takes it upon himself to kill the creature because it has been passed down. He realizes there's been knowledge on how to kill this thing passed down through his generations. He's basically a Van Helsing. Everything about this movie is like, this was going to be a vampire story, wasn't it? And you just decided at the last minute to change it to
Yep.
a werewolf. I'd have never seen a werewolf story where a werewolf sleeps in a coffin.
Yeah, I definitely have that written down somewhere with the Christopher Lee connection as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Christopher Lee is in this movie. Yeah, he's one of the passengers, but he is not in this episode. I do think it's the weakest of the stories, but it's a good intro. Again, like the bus driver one, or the hearse driver
Hmm.
one. It's a
Yeah.
good setup.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm maybe a little less generous. I thought it was a little boring, but at least it was fast.
Yeah, it goes by fast. It sort of sets us up. It sets us up for the Freddie Francis is good at this sort of Technicolor Gothic look. It helped inspire him, and Terrence Fisher helped inspire people like Mario Bava, who
Hmm.
then took it further. So I do like the look of it. My interesting fact on this one is something I don't know for sure. Whereas the werewolf's human persona, Count Cosmo Valdemar, I think later on, Paul Niche, real name Juanito Molina, who was very famous in Spanish horror movies for playing Count Valdemar Daninsky throughout these 12 movies, starting in 1968, Mark of the Wolf Man. So that's only 3 years after this. And I can't find any information on how Valdemar is some sort of like, there's no other stories about a werewolf named Valdemar as far as I can tell. They spell it with a V or a W versus a V, but same pronunciation. And so I do wonder if Nashi was like, oh, I need a name for my guy. Let's name him after that guy. That's pretty much the only fun factoid I could think, and it might not even be true.
Well, it's an unusual name, so
Yeah,
I
it
bet
just seems
maybe.
weird.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we can just move on to the next
Yeah,
one.
I'm not interested in the werewolf. The creeping vine, however,
Yeah.
extremely interesting to me. Very proto The Mist.
Oh yeah, that's a good. I was thinking. Well, okay, I was thinking. I'll say that this is about a family that returns from vacation to find a malicious vine is growing in their garden, and the vine like resists being trimmed. It strangles the family dog. They call the ministry. They go to the Ministry of Defense, which just seems like overkill at the time. Imagine if you had a scary weed and you went to the American military for help with your scary weed. But it turns out that yeah, this thing is super evil and powerful, and so it kills people. And the interesting thing about it is that it's just this plant that just wants to murder people. Usually, killer plant movies, the plants want to eat people, but this one just wants to strangle you to
Yeah, this
death.
one's content with strangling. I I just one of my notes says, imagine if someone is telling your tarot and they're like, yes, your dog is going to die due to a plant. This is not at all what I would think of.
You never seen the dog strangled by plant tarot card?
Never.
It represents change or
Yeah.
something like that.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Yeah, this one goes hard. And it does feel very Stephen King because it is about a family. It is like nature
Mhm.
bites back kind of, but what did you think of this one?
Well, I was so focused on the fact that there was a pretty popular story, Day of the Triffids,
Oh,
which
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so I was thinking they were inspired by that, and so I didn't even consider the Stephen King angle, which Stephen King watched a lot of this stuff. I mean, I would imagine he knows this movie, so yeah, that makes sense. And then I like how colorful this one is. It's even more colorful. It looks like a Technicolor sci-fi movie. It
Mhm.
doesn't look like a horror movie. And it made me think that maybe I do need to do a Killer Plant episode of Genre Grinder someday.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh, you should. Well, do you listen to Evolution of Horror, that
no, I
podcast?
no, I haven't.
They just did a whole series on nature biting back, and killer plants was definitely involved, but
Yeah,
also killer children, killer dogs, lots of things. The Happening, of course.
right, right. And I tried to make a list of all the Killer Plant movies I could possibly think of. The Happening came up.
Yeah.
They had the Triffids. The Ruins was one
The
I was thinking of because those
Ruins.
are vines. Um, Little Shop of Horrors is kind of obvious one. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Hmm.
The original Thing from Another World. He's technically a plant monster, not a shape
Oh,
shifting
wow.
monster.
Did not know that.
He's basically a vegetable. Biolante from Godzilla versus Biolante is a giant flower. That's one of the better Godzilla. That's getting a Criterion release.
Good.
Yeah. And then Montongo, which is mushroom people, and I assume most folks count fungus as a plant. I know they're kind of different things, but I would
Yeah.
throw that
Yeah, I'd throw it in.
in. And the happening, yes,
And
the
The
happening about
Happening. Yes,
where plant farts make you kill yourself.
exactly.
Yeah, I think this could have been a longer story because I think you can get a lot of there's these cheeky corruptions of domestic bliss that they kind of have to wedge in really quickly. And I think that could be a bigger theme that could fill a good 15 minutes of film time if you really went into it.
And it has a science fiction angle as
Mhm.
well, so it's unique in that way.
The plants also cut the phone lines at one point, which is very funny to
Oh,
me.
I loved that part.
It's like in Night of the Living Dead, the zombie accidentally cuts the phone line by just stumbling into it, but no, this plant goes out of its way. It's smarter than a zombie.
I want Creeping Vine plant POV. Release the cut.
Right, right, right. But yeah, I think it's maybe my favorite of this. It ends a little unsatisfactorily. It's sort of supposed to end like The Birds, where this might be the apocalypse, but we're not sure, kind of
Mhm.
thing. But yeah, it's a little unsatisfying, but I guess I'll take it. So the next one, the it's just called Voodoo. Another, I feel like they just thought up the titles after the fact. This is the funny episode. We each one has a
Yes.
funny episode.
Yeah.
It's a jazz musician named Biff Bailey, which is just a fantastic character name, Biff Bailey. He's played by Roy Castle, who is an actual accomplished musician and trumpet player. He gets a gig in the West Indies. I think it's supposed to be Haiti. I don't think we use the term West Indies anymore. I'm not. And against every single person he comes across as advice, he goes to witness a sacred voodoo ritual. And then against everybody's advice, including the people who've caught him and decided not to murder him, he steals the melody for one of his gigs. And it ends up leading to a lot of goofy pratfalls and then this sort of weird storm that destroys the club and culminates with this guy who I think is supposed to sort of represent the voodoo spirit coming to his home and scaring him to the point where he either faints or dies. I'm not sure. And he takes the song back.
I think this is my favorite one because the death feels so justified. He
Yeah,
was warned by literally like almost every character.
his friends, his people he meets, like everybody, the voodoo people are surprisingly polite to him for nosing into their thing. There's a very Looney Tunes gag where he is writing notes on a paper excitedly, and the camera cuts back to the people dancing. It cuts back to him, and there's a guy with his arms crossed, a big man appear behind him, and then it cuts back to the dancing. It cuts back now. There's two men with crossed arms behind him again, and now there's three men. It's such a like Daffy Duck gig. But
I really liked that. I really, really liked that. I was very concerned. Every time I see voodoo in a horror movie, I
Mhm.
get concerned that it's just going to be the least sensitive portrayal.
Yeah, and it's
But this is like, I mean, I'm obviously no expert, but it surprised me.
it's a made up version of voodoo, but they do go with actual it's almost like a tourism board. The beginning of the thing, like when he goes there, it's like whoever they got involved with this was like, yeah, but make us look good as a place. Again, I think it's Haiti is what it's supposed to be. So yeah, I think the voodoo part, if you're an actual voodoo practitioner, you'd probably would hate this movie. But as far as ethnic stereotypes go, they do a really good job. They even have part where Biff Bailey sees a black man and says, oh, hey, is this your country? And the guy says, no, I'm from the West End, I'm just doing
Yeah,
a gig.
I loved that too. And you know, the god that they referenced, Dembella, is the god from Child's Play as well.
Oh, that okay. Okay. Yep, didn't remember that at all. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. You know, again, not the most sensitive portrayal of voodoo, but yeah, the death field felt justified. I'll mention too, every time they cut back to the tarot reader, he turns over another card and just say, this is how you avoid this outcome. And every time he turns over the card, it's death. And he's
Right.
kind of keeping it a secret from, to politely keep it a secret from the
Right.
other men in the car.
Which doesn't make sense based on the twist that he is Death, that why would Death be so like, but within before they reveal that, it's just that he's a tarot guy who doesn't want to tell these people bad news.
Exactly. And like a British Grim Reaper, yeah, of
Yeah.
course he'd be polite about it.
Oh, oh dear. Oh dear. No, it's fine. It's fine. So then the next one is Disembodied Hand. And I don't know if this is the best one, but this is the one people seem to most remember. In large part,
Interesting.
it's
Okay.
it's mostly because it's the one with Christopher Lee and Michael Goh in it.
Yeah, makes sense.
And Goh is these days best known as Alfred from the Tim Burton Batman movies, but he was part of the Hammer uh, uh, cast standbys for a while there. And the story here is this massive asshole of an art critic who Lee plays. And Lee is so good at playing prissy assholes. It's really underrated thing of it because he has this booming voice and this really frightening presence, but he's really good at playing nebbish little weasels.
That's so
He's
true. Yes.
um
He was
so he
perfect. I'm glad he wasn't in the vampire one.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
when it would have yeah. But he's menaced by the disembodied hand of a dead painter who is played by Go, who was driven to suicide after well, okay, so Christopher Lee is just being a mean critic and saying everything sucks. So Go brings out a painting and said, "Well, you think about this one? It's a different painter. Oh, this one's great." And he's saying all the reasons why I'd like to meet the painter, and it's a chimpanzee, which is very weird. It should have been a child.
Yeah. I thought it was going to be a child, but no, there has to be a
They have a
chimp in
they
it.
have a pet chimp, but he tries to run Gao over because he keeps bringing it up in other things. The Michael Gao character is being very mean. At a certain point, the bullying has gone too far, and so Lee runs him over this car, and and it makes his hand fall off. So he kills himself, and then his hand haunts Lee, and it's I feel like it's played for. I think it's supposed to be funny.
Yeah, that was my problem with it, that it didn't feel like campy or funny enough.
Yeah, but I mean, you can see like the roots of like Evil Dead 2
Yes.
or something like that. I mean, the idea of a haunted hand has been there's this movie, a silent film from 24 called The Hands of Orlok that goes about that. And there's a really bad early Oliver Stone psycho thriller called The Hand, which is basically like this story, but taken as seriously as possible, which just makes it funnier and boringer.
There's also
But
the Hand of Glory. Are you aware of this?
yeah,
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 yeah, like
yeah.
pickled hand, sometimes turned into a candle.
I suppose a monkey's paw almost counts for this. It's not quite the same thing, but
Maybe that's
hand.
why the monkey was there.
Maybe it was them. Yeah, maybe that's that was their reasoning.
Perhaps.
I do want to say I think the disembodied hand, it looks really rubbery, like the outside of it doesn't look like convincingly like a hand, but they made a little machine that crawls, and that's pretty impressive for 1965. I was surprised rewatching it. I'm like, that's not a puppet. That's a little machine they made. It actually works.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I did not notice that. I had trouble seeing. It was very dark. The parts where the hand was
Uh-huh.
were, so I had trouble seeing that. But from what I saw, it looked okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like they hadn't figured out how to make fake skin yet,
Hmm.
is what it comes down. But somebody in the production figured out how to make a little crawling hand that worked okay. I mean, it's not super convincing, but early days stuff, the fact that it seems to be working on its own, it's probably just turn it on and let it go kind of situation. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
Okay, and then it ends on the also not creatively titled The Vampire. Again, Christopher Lee is not a vampire in this. This one is a very young Donald Sutherland who discovers that his new French bride, Nicole, who's played by Jennifer Jane, might be a vampire. He goes to a colleague, Dr. Blake, played by Max Adrian, who Nicole immediately dislikes, and we don't know why. But we later discover that not only is she a vampire, but under Blake's advice, the guy kills his wife and then gets taken in for murder because the doctor was also a vampire and wanted to get rid of both the competition of another doctor in town and the competition of another vampire in town. It's very EC Comics kind of twist. It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense if you think about it too long because of the way it's one of those twists where like, yeah, but why did the guy, if he's a vampire, why did he blank? Why did he blank? Like you think about it too hard, it doesn't work, but
For what
it's
it
interesting.
is, I really do like the twist for what it
And I
is.
like and I like the twist too because he looks directly into camera and he tells us the twist basically. It's a fun little way of revealing it, that having the actor tell the audience, oh, by the way, I'm also a vampire. Wahaha.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that is a scary story, that some of you decide your loved one is a undead monster, and you destroy them justifiably only to be thrown in prison for murdering them.
Yes.
uh it's a pretty good story.
Yeah,
uh,
played more realistically than like the other vampire stories that were kind of circulating around this time. The bat special effect was quite bad,
no,
but Donald
no.
Donald Sutherland knocked it out of the park. He was the
Yeah,
best part.
it's interesting to see him in a British horror film.
Yes.
The House That Dripped Blood also ends with a very silly vampire story.
Remind
uh,
me what that
It's the one that has
was.
the guy who played Doctor Who, and it's actually the cape he wears that turns him into a vampire.
Oh,
Um, it,
yes.
yeah, that movie is much sillier. They towards the end there of this run, they got very very silly.
I do remember that. Yes. Yeah. That's
But yeah,
interesting. Cool.
yeah, so this one, and then it ends, and everybody finds out, oh, we're all gonna die. It must be a train crash. What do we do about the train crash? And then they think they've survived the train crash, but of course, Peter Cushing is playing death, and he has such a perfect line reading where Christopher Lee says, "Who are you?" And Cushing just sort of pauses and looks, says, "Have you not guessed?" And
Amazing.
it's like, oh fuck.
I'm so
Uh,
glad you like Peter Cushing as much as I do because I feel like anyone who knows about this genre, I mean the horror fans obviously, the Amicus and Hammer and whatnot are always gravitating towards Christopher Lee, but Peter Cushing is like the unsung hero.
One thing Patrick and I talked about when we were talking about Lee a while back, or Cushing, is that the difference between him and Lee is that Lee hated everything he was doing. He thought it was all beneath him.
Hmm.
And Cushing always gave 100% and did whatever. I mean, he in part because at that pretty soon after this, his wife dies, and he's just trying to work to not think about it. So there's a sadness behind it, but also because he just respects the craft enough to just give it his all, even for the terrible cheap movies he was in later in his career. That he always was game to do it, which is part of why Christopher Lee loved him so much too. They're an interesting pair.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I've read similar things about Vincent Price kind of getting
Hmm.
tired of playing the same roles over and over, especially in the Poe cycle. But of
Yeah.
course, that's,
Well, actually, that's a fantastic segue.
oh.
to
Yeah,
end this fun.
actually, sorry, I did not mean to do that, but yes.
So yeah, if we move on, now we're going to be in the 80s, 1987, which you're getting to the home video era by 1987. And I'm going to go with the title. I was going to call this The Offspring, but at the last minute I changed all my notes to say From a Whisper to a Scream because I decided I liked that title more. Um,
It makes
and I
more
think
sense, I think, too.
and it was the title on the screen on my Blu-ray, I realized.
Mhm.
This is the directorial debut of Jeff Burr. It was co-written and produced by Darren Scott and writer C. Courtney Joyner. And yeah, The Offspring is the alternate title. It's not an obscure movie, but it was even easy to find. I remember it being on VHS every store you went to, but it sort of in the DVD era kind of disappeared, like from like people just didn't talk about it. It was available, but people just didn't talk about it very much. And it was always a personal favorite because I don't want to say it's one of the best of its kind, but it's one of the grottiest of its kind. It's like it has this ickiness to it that feels ahead of its time for 1987. It has a cult following, but I think that it's a little underseen. And I think the most interesting way to describe it is that this is Creep Show came out in 82, so there's a pretty big divide there, but I think this is kind of the anti-Creep Show, whereas it's supposed to be closer to an Amicus vibe, whereas Creep Show is supposed to be literally an EC comic and it has all these colors, and Creep Show is kind of a beautiful movie and a funny movie, and this is a ugly, mean-spirited movie. I like the contrast of the two. I mean, we could have
Mhm.
covered Creep Show, but I felt like that was like I always try to not cover the most obvious entry because that would be the one that most people have seen. I'm guessing
Yes,
of
and I
all of them.
appreciate that, and I just want to thank you because this was such a surprise. It reminded me so much of, Ty West's work, actually.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah,
Just like the
yeah.
absurdity and the sleaze and the saturation and the music. It really surprised me. I did not think I was going to like this as much as I did.
I'm a recovering bona fide Ty West hater
Oh,
who has
really?
slowly and begrudgingly decided I like his movies, newer ones. I think I just did not. I think it was his part of VHS that actually was filmed outside of Tucson, and it. I think he did the one where they're just like they're on the road. I
Oh,
can't remember.
yeah. Yeah, I do. I vaguely remember that. I'm not like a super fan of his.
I think
Um,
he's gotten better. I think he has definitely
yes.
improved on his craft. I think I saw House of the Devil and it had a cool credit sequence, and then I lost interest, and so I decided I hate this guy. And then and then I it was the found footage one he did was the first one I saw where I was like, okay, maybe I like him. He did it was sort of a Jonestown
Mm,
kind of found footage thing.
yeah.
And then I only saw X, but I would like to watch the other two at some point.
The other two are great. You know, Maxine didn't get great reviews, but that's kind of my favorite. That's him doing De Palma. And that actually works really well because again, just like the weird absurdity, the sleaze, the violence. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate it. I had never heard of the director from a Whisker to a Scream, Jeff Burr. He did a
Burr,
lot of
yeah.
sequels, I
Yeah,
read.
he's kind of a yeah, he was like a for hire guy, and he had his sort of yeah, it was the home video era where they would make sequels that they knew were going to do better on video and maybe not even get a theatrical release half the time. And I mean I don't know, I think this is probably my favorite of I haven't seen all his movies, but the wraparound sequence here begins with a very game Martine Bestwick, who is having the time of her life as she gets a lethal injection. And Lawrence Tierney has this like random cameo as I guess he's supposed to be the warden. And it is the most unrealistic lethal injection because it's just a room and it's a single injection and they're just people in the room, including a reporter.
Including
Played
reporters, yeah.
and the main reporter is played by Susan Tyrrell, and I think that's funny because I've mistaken her for Martine Bestwick on several occasions. I think they're very similar looking
Yes.
women,
I thought that too. Yes.
but she's sort of a nosy reporter investigating Bestwick's crimes. I did write down that she's a pretty big cult figure. She was nominated for an Oscar for Fat City and did voices for the Chipmunk Adventure the same year she appeared in this movie. But you go back far enough, and she was in Andy Warhol's Bad. She was in the Forbidden Zone, which is the movie that introduced Oingo Boingo to the world. And she was in Big Top Pee Wee. She was in Paul Verhoeven's medieval action movie Flesh and Blood, and she's an absolute scenery chewer in the movie Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker.
That's how I know her, but my
Yeah,
jaw is like on the floor. I had no idea she was in any of those others.
it's so funny. And the weirdest and most random one is that Roy Frumps in 1981, he did a documentary called Document of the Dead, where he just took a bunch of footage from the set of Dawn of the Dead and put together a documentary. And it was kind of ahead of its time because there wasn't DVD special features at the time. So there was this movie that everybody liked. She's the narrator of the Dawn of the Dead behind the scenes movie from 1981. It's just random things. She must have just known. I mean, she knew Andy Warhol, so she must have just known people.
Maybe,
Um,
yeah. Maybe she was just super nice as well.
yeah, yeah, people just liked her. But
Mhm.
so she goes and meets up with Vincent Price, who, as we were just alluding to, did not like this movie. He regretted doing it. He thought it was too violent, but he also was polite enough to say he really liked working with Jeff Burr. So, that's something beyond Lee, who would have said it was crap. Nobody should see it. I hate all the people involved.
Exactly. And they got him in a very interesting way too. Didn't Jeff Burr like approach he found Price's address and kind of just knocked on the door and was like, "Hey, I'm a burgeoning horror director. Can you be in this movie for me?" And he liked the script.
Yeah, I mean, Price was an interesting guy. There's stories about how he ended up introducing all of the Poe films on Iowa public television because someone just asked him, and he just went, "Sure, that sounds like fun. I'll do that."
Yeah. Yeah.
Just good. Yeah, he's very important to art preservation too. He was a big collector.
Patron of the arts for sure. And I
Hmm.
love that he plays a librarian, obviously, in this movie too.
Yeah, and so he is relaying these stories like this town, Oldfield, I think it's South Carolina, is cursed, and here's why, and here's some stories. The first story is the grottiest. It's called Stanley, and a disturbed, blundering grocery store clerk named Stanley, who's played by Clu Gulager. He cares for his ailing sister Eileen, who is romantically in love with him to his chagrin, and meanwhile he is a unrequited crush on his boss Grace, played by Megan McFarland. And Grace very begrudgingly agrees to go on a date with him just out of politeness, and they are completely incompatible. And Stanley ends up strangling her to death when she refuses his advances, and then goes mad and breaks into the funeral home to consummate the relationship. Thankfully, off camera, it is implied. they
Yes.
don't go that they don't quite go that far.
Ugh, yeah.
And then it's like 9 months later, and he has had enough of his sister. He murders her, and very swiftly, the mutant love child of his post-death relations to Grace comes to his house to murder him, and is this little mutant puppet thing, which is a pretty awesome little mutant
Yeah,
puppet.
I really liked that part.
It's mostly backlit, but and it has this thing where it moves like too jitterily. It doesn't move naturally, but it actually works. It makes it look uncanny and weird. It's so yeah. So this is the story of yeah. I feel like this could have been a really long, like a full 90-minute, really depressing movie about like a movie
Mhm.
like Maniac or Taxi Driver,
Yes.
about a really unlikable protagonist who is a psychopath and how he just falls into disarray. I mean, it also reminds me of Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer in some
I
way.
was just gonna say that, yes, and I
Yeah.
I think if it was longer, I mean, this is probably whenever you set I guess I don't wanna generalize, but normally when it's in the '80s and you set a horror movie in the South, you're going to get a lot of, like, unfavorable Southern
Uh-huh.
stereotypes,
Yeah.
and I think this episode plays into that the most.
Yeah.
So I could see if it were more drawn out, then it would just be kind of like a exploitation type of thing.
And by 1987, it would be really uh, sad version of it. It
Yeah.
wouldn't be a fun, but I could see that. And then the mutant baby being a little bit more of a twist if there was some time between murdering the sister, if it didn't just show up at the house right then. I remember I didn't remember that they said flat out that it was his mutant baby. I remembered it be just saying 9 months later, and we were supposed to do the math, but he does call him daddy.
Yes.
I completely forgot about that part.
Yeah. There's
So
just
this
so
is
much going on in this one too.
yeah.
It's just packed with stuff.
Gulager is another cult figure, but most people remember him from Return of the Living Dead and as the dad in Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And I remember him because his son John was the director selected for the third season of Project Greenlight, which is been erased from the internet basically, but is probably my favorite season of a reality show ever. It is fascinating. This basically the without going too long into it. At this point, the studio Miramax wants a Project Greenlight thing to be a successful movie instead of an art house movie that makes no money. So they tell Matt Damon and Ben Affleck they have to make a horror movie, and they're pissed off about it. So they say, "Fine, we'll make a horror movie, but we get to pick the director." And they pick the artsiest fartsiest guy, and the studio picks the stupidest from Dusk Till Dawn ripoff script.
Wow.
And so every nothing works. And poor John Gulager at one point, he wants his dad, who like they're like, yes, you can have your dad in this because he's a famous actor. But he's like, I also want my girlfriend in it. And they're like, Jesus Christ. And I also want my mom in it. And they're like, for fuck's sake. The movie they made was called Feast, and it's not very good. But man, is it a cool, just chaotic thing. I don't know if people upload it to YouTube every once in a while, and it's just I love it,
I'm going to
and
seek that out for sure.
especially now that we know how evil the Weinsteins are.
Hmm.
Like it's great, great stuff. But he's good. He's really what I mean. His Coke bottle eyeglasses, his horrible frumpy clothes, his slick back hair in this. This one isn't particularly gory. It's mostly implied violence. It's just gross.
Yeah, and there's some nudity too,
Yeah,
but it's like
but it's
gross incest nudity. So,
it's very matter of fact too. That's what I
yeah,
found interesting. It's not sexualized in any way.
no, no,
It's just here's a naked woman who has to take ice baths because she has some sort of weird condition.
exactly. And her brother is helping her.
Yeah,
Would people know this actor then? Is that why they put this episode at the front?
I think so. I think because at this point, both Return of the Living Dead and Nightmare on Elm Street 2 had come out. So I think that people were aware, like the horror movie fans would have been aware of who he is.
Okay.
He wasn't like Robert Englund level, but people knew him.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would make sense. And also to build it around him makes sense.
This oh man, there's just so much in this one. Maybe we should move on because I could get
Yeah,
really nitty gritty into some of the lines that were said. I mean, it's very clever, very very gross, clever in its
yeah,
sleaze, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Good sleaze. Okay, well the next one's called On the Run. And I think this is supposed to take place in the 50s based on the Cars.
Yes.
And it has another unlikable loser because there are a lot of unlikable losers in this movie. His name's Jesse. He's played by Terry Kesser. He is mortally wounded while escaping hardened criminals that he was foolish enough to rip off. He stumbles in the bayou to the home of a voodoo practitioner named Felder Evans, who is Harry Caesar, played by Harry Caesar. And Felder uses his gifts to heal Jesse. Unfortunately, Jesse is a deplorable scumbag. So instead of just accepting the good fortune, he learns that his friend here is probably immortal, is at least borderline immortal, and demands that he shares the magic of immortality with them to the point where he attacks and tries to kill him. The movie ends with Felder Evans basically saying, "Hey, I already gave you the immortality. I've just been being nice to you, so you can't die. So I'm gonna kill you in the worst possible way because you can't die." So he chops him up and burns him and dumps his body, and it ends with doctors in a hospital and this little mangled piece of man saying, "I don't know how he's still alive, but his pain receptors are still working," and we just have to assume that for eternity he's going to be in pain as he dies and rots. And yeah,
Hmm.
pretty gruesome stuff. More voodoo.
More
I feel like
voodoo. Yes.
a, a lot of these movies have a voodoo bit. It's not just the ones we've covered. There's it comes up in other ones.
Yeah, I feel like it's you know, it's similar. It's alongside like you have to have a werewolf, you have to have a vampire, you have to, you
Yeah.
know, there has to be tarot, there has to be voodoo. Yeah, it's interesting. I also I think that this is around the time that I was watching it that I realized that the exposition drops kind of work with the tone of
Mhm.
this movie.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
I think this episode opens with him saying like to himself, nobody double crosses Jesse Hardwick. Like
Yeah.
you gotta you gotta let the audience know what's going on. But it works. It's just it's a weird, corny balancing act in all of
The
these.
my favorite part is at the very beginning that the wife wakes him up and she's dressed for a funeral and announces that she sold him out. Uh, and I feel like this is something more femme fatale should do. Should like wake up, hey, I sold you out. I'm wearing a funeral dress for your sake. And
Amazing.
it's great because the guys come in and shoot him, and she just sort of watches. She doesn't try to run away or hide. They don't try to attack her. It's like, no, we're just gonna get it through you. And thanks for the tip off.
And a cool trailer too, right? It's like all
Yeah,
blue
yeah,
stripes.
yeah,
Like very kind of kind of inconspicuous.
yeah.
Yeah. I felt like again, the voodoo probably if you are a voodoo practitioner, you would hate this, but
Yeah.
it is
I'm not
not the least sensitive portrayal of voodoo I've ever seen in a horror movie.
I mean, at the very least, the Evans is a good guy. He is not a witch doctor. He is a good guy who is immortal, so he has to kind of be in hiding because he's immortal. He's like a good vampire in vampire lore. Like the good vampires have to hide because otherwise people will notice they don't die.
Yeah.
That's something I didn't say is that there are creepy nightmare sequences in these movies that are sort of like there to just toss in a little more
I
violence.
was just going to say that because doesn't
Yeah.
he has a dream about like arms wrapping him
Mhm.
and
Yeah, it's like a pretty good zombie attack,
yeah,
actually.
and Stanley in the other one has a dream, I think, as
Yeah.
well too, about his
Yeah.
sister being all like bloody and fucked up.
Yep.
Yeah, that is cool. Yeah, there has to be some like nightmarish special effects or some sort of like jump scare like, "Oh, you think this was part of the narrative? No, it was all a dream."
This is the height of Nightmare on Elm Street, so everybody's trying a little bit to be Nightmare on Elm Street, just a little. Um, okay, so the next one is Lovecraft's Traveling Amusements. The title indicates that this is a Lovecraft. It's not. It's not a Lovecraft. There's nothing Lovecraftian about this particular
No.
story. They just like the name. Um, I think this is the least memorable, but probably because it's the least mean spirited, because the other ones are so fucking angry.
Yeah.
It does feel feature the most gore. And so this is the 1930s, they specifically say, where Catherine, who's played by Dee Dee Lanier, visits a traveling circus and finds herself romantically attracted to the freak show's glass eater, Steven, played by Ron Brooks. And sadly, oh, I just remembered something from the last one, a stupid factoid. The guy who played the villain, Jesse, is Bernie in Weekend at Bernie's.
Oh my god, I was just talking about Weekend at Bernie's.
He's Bernie. I forgot that because he's wearing glasses and like a wig the whole time. But
Yeah.
yes, so okay. Anyway,
Wow.
going back.
Thank
If
you.
you
Thank you
want to
for
see,
interrupting because that is
yeah,
relevant. That is relevant.
if you if you want to see Bernie as actually acting and doing things and being a mean person, then there you go.
Being a, like
So
a
anyway,
50s greaser kind of.
yeah, yeah. But they're anyway. So the two of them fall in love. The relationship goes against the rules of the carnival's boss, who's a snake woman, who's played by Rosalind Cash, who is just she's the highlight of the whole piece. She's always so much fun. But she rules her staff with threats and blackmail because they're all criminals who basically sell her their souls to be hidden from prosecution. It's not a literal soul selling thing. She gets magical control over them and gives them some sort of gift. In his case, he can eat anything. And so he has to spend the rest of his life in this carnival eating stuff, and he's not allowed to ever leave. And so it's a star-crossed lovers story, and it ends with them thinking they've gotten away, and the snake woman curses Steven to painfully expel all the glass and metal he's been eating, all through his skin, So it just kind of keeps going. It's a pretty long sequence. You see mostly blood splattering on walls, but there are some pretty nasty close-ups of skin splitting open and
Hmm. Yeah, pretty gross. And then his eyeball chest
yeah.
as well. Yeah, this is like Ray Bradbury slasher.
That's a good. Yeah, I like that. This could be illustrated man. Well, Bradbury actually, I think, wrote some EC comics.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
So this would have been in his wheelhouse. Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good comparison because it's not quite an EC comic because it's an ironic death, but it's not an ironic death for punishment's sake. Steven doesn't do anything wrong, and then it ends even sadder because she becomes the pincushion woman, like Rosalind Cat, the Snake Woman
Mhm.
gets her, and so she has to sell her soul too. I don't know why exactly, but um, yeah,
Yeah,
this is another
it is it's a sad one for sure, and they kind of hit all of the destinations, right, of like a 30s carnival, like
right.
you know, the freak show, the graveyard, etc.
It has bits in common with like Freaks and the original Nightmare Alley.
Yeah.
It even has Angelo Rosito, who is probably the most famous little person ever, who is in Freaks when he was pretty young, and most people remember him as Master from the Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. He's a very recognizable face and voice. So that must have been another actor that Jeff Burr was just nice to.
Yeah. This was an okay one. I
Yeah,
think it was pretty good. I feel bad for the girlfriend, of course, because again, like you said, she did nothing wrong and she's the one that gets punished. So,
yeah. Okay, and then it ends with four soldiers, which is kind of the showstopper. It's at the end of the American Civil War in a Union segment led by a beastly sergeant named Gallon, played by Cameron Mitchell. He wanders into a nearly abandoned Dixie town run by psychotic abandoned orphans of Confederate soldiers. And the children take them hostage and torture them and play games. And then they do this all to appease their magistrate. And the magistrate turns out to be the leftover body parts of their parents, kind of hung up on a sort of I don't know what you call the crosses that are an X instead of a cross, but it's clearly supposed to be a stars and bars type thing. It's supposed to reflect the Confederate flag. And this is basically Children of the Corn, but with a Civil War twist. And I don't really like the movie Children of the Corn very much. So
yeah, yeah. I would be fine not spending too much time on this one. The kid actors are not the best. The
there's one kid actor who's pretty
the
good. The one like
leader,
yeah,
yeah, I wrote that
I,
too.
I feel like they got him from a talent studio, and the other ones were just kids around set or
Yeah, like
something.
the costumer's kid or whatever.
And I like this one, but I don't think this works as a full feature length movie. Like maybe a little bit longer, but I think anything over 40 minutes, and that's just too long for this story. And I give the thing going on here is so you have Vincent Price who didn't really want to make this movie after the fact, and Cameron Mitchell was at a real low point. He was a contract player in the 40s, and then he moved to Italy in the 60s and became like a pretty big player. He's in a lot of Mario Bava films, and he was a big champion of Bava and wanted him to be able to work in the US. And then he sort of went into TV and B movies, but he was apparently an alcoholic, and it just sort of his life just sort of was falling apart at this point. And to the point where he started being in these action movies where he would be in one scene. And it's actually very similar to what happened with Bruce Willis towards the end there,
Hmm.
where he'd be in like one scene and it wouldn't really connect to the rest of the movie. And then at a certain point, they started reusing his one scene in a different movie. It would be like copy pasted. But all that said, I think he goes all in because his character is like just an absolute villain on every level, who shoots his own men, who doesn't care that the war is over, who wants his men to go in, like they're looking forward to finding abandoned women in these Confederate towns.
Yeah, just like
And
the absolute scumbag, and we love a revenge story,
yeah,
death of a scumbag.
he goes extra far by killing the little girl he helps, that he convinces to help him escape. Like he didn't need to do that.
Terrible.
Just absolutely awful person. And I understand why. There's always the question, like, why would you make the Union the bad guys, not the Confederates. But it's taking place in South Carolina. That makes more sense. And there was the true story. The little girl mentioned Sherman, so I guess this is the idea is that their town was burned down during Sherman's march to the sea, even though that all took place in Georgia. But there was a historical situation where a Union soldier just sort of scorched earth to put the terror into the Confederacy. Uh, Pretty dark stuff. But we can pretend that this town is like on the border. It's really close to Georgia.
Okay, yeah, we can pretend because it all kind of that's why they went back so far as the Civil War, right? That's
Right.
because it's like we're telling stories about the land, even like even before it was a town, even before it was incorporated.
Yeah, and this is supposed to be the event that like cursed the ground to make this a horrible place. I really like this movie, and I really like evil kid movies. The best evil kid movie is Who Can Kill a Child. If anybody wants to watch that, fucking great movie.
Will you email me on how to find it because I've been wanting to find it
I'll try to figure
forever.
it out. Yeah,
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 it's hard to find, but
yeah. It got a Blu-ray release that I think is now out of print. I'm not sure.
okay.
Yeah, great movie. Better than this, but I like this movie. It's really violent. There's a great scene where the kids are playing pin the tail on the donkey, but instead it's pin the limbs on the corpse.
So
Good stuff.
disgusting, but like
I'm
it
I'm
works. It works with the film. It
I'm
works with the tone.
I'm surprised they got away with it because this was a time when the MPAA was really cracking down. Like a lot of those later Friday the 13th movies are almost blood free because they cut all the gore out of them, and they let this. Maybe they just it was too fantastical, and they decided it's still. But kids, then like MPAA is always worried about kids recreating
Exactly.
things, and
Yes.
it's like ugh. Anyway,
Yeah, and I think the blood was mostly which one? The Lovecraft one, right? So like this
yeah,
one is not as bloody.
no,
Um
it's just body
just
parts, lots of
body
body
parts, yeah.
yeah, this is an out of print, but if anybody finds it for like an affordable price on eBay or whatever, the Scream Factory Blu-ray has a feature length making of, which was a big surprise when because just didn't think anybody cared enough about this movie to make a feature length making of thing, but it's good stuff.
Yeah, this one really surprised me. I mean, it really held its own. It was consistent. And I think that's the problem with a lot of anthologies is that you don't really feel like they all tie together.
Hmm.
The through line doesn't really work. This had a consistent tone. It was a
Yeah,
gross tone. It was a sleazy tone,
yeah.
but it was consistent and it was fun.
Well, I mean, we're running out of time here, but let's cover. We watched one other movie, and it was the weakest of the
We can
bunch.
go
But
really fast.
yeah.
I don't
So
have
so
much to say.
I wanted to do a more modern one, and I already said the streaming age seems to have made a lot of these, and I wanted to do one that was a little more inclusive, and so that's when we were talking about this like Mexican Barbaro and Satanic Hispanics, and I was like, well, let's save that for one that's just all non-English language ones. So that left us with the best thing was this one with XX double X, whatever you call it, that is directed entirely by women. This came out in 2017. I remembered not liking it, but I wanted to give it a second chance just based on the fact that I remembered it was directed and written by women, and it felt like that was actually important to it. It wasn't just stories, well, with one exception, that you would assume a man would also just actually, even though a man did write one, but they feel like stories about women for women a little bit more than you would expect from a lot of things.
hmm
Um,
And I remember seeing this when it came out too. I'm a big St. Vincent fan. So Annie Clark, St. Vincent, directed one of these. And I remember
yeah,
that being like a big draw for me specifically. And I didn't really like it, but I did want to revisit it. And it's short.
it's very short. Like even with four stories, it's under 90 minutes. There's a cool stop motion thing directed by Sofia Carrillo. It's similar to kind of a Quay Brothers or Jan Schwankmeyer kind of thing. That jittery. I mean, I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. The Tool music videos
Yeah,
from
me
the 90s.
too. I love it. The
Um,
Wolf House, if you saw that one.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah.
it's cool. I like it. I would watch more of it. So
Not much of a plot, but it's great to
yeah,
watch. If you are creeped out by stop motion, doll houses and the like, you'll be creeped out by this.
yeah. So then the first story It's written and directed by Jovanka Vekovic. And this is based on a story by Jack Ketchum, who is a pretty, he died just recently, actually, a pretty famous writer. He wrote The Other Offspring is based on,
Hmm.
he co-wrote The Woman, which was a sort of sequel to The Offspring. All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, I think was his. I can't remember for sure. So this is technically based on a story by a man, but it is, I think it fits the edict really well. There's a woman who has her kids in the subway. They're sitting next to a man holding a big red Christmas present type box. The man shows the son what's in the box. It disturbs him. In the following days, the boy refuses to eat. There's no answers at the doctor. The problem worsens when the son shares whatever this secret is with his sister, and she stops eating. And the husband starts to resent the wife that she's continuing to eat and not taking, he doesn't think she's taking this seriously enough. And then he gets told the secret and he stops eating, and it ends with all of them dying of emaciation except for the mother. It's really upsetting. It's
Yeah.
like the one, it really bothered me. I don't have children, and when I worked with kids, I was only responsible for them eating lunch. We never had a single kid that didn't want to eat lunch. I
All
have
the food that's shown in this is just like beautiful, like
yeah.
junk food and like fried chicken and pizza and all the burgers and like just you would not refuse this food.
And I think that that is a very common fear for parents, because I know my friend's son is not an eater and she has to kind of make him eat, and she's figured it out. He's perfectly healthy, but like I imagine there is a fear that, like, what if my child refuses to eat and dies and there's nothing I can do about it. It's a pretty scary idea. It does pull it off pretty well, and it works as a short. And I think there's a lot to unpack about an inability to just fix depression in your loved ones. Like, you can't just make them work or whatever, you know. And I think there's a little bit about expectations put on women as far as eating, the fact that she continues eating.
Mhm.
I had it in mind that she actually gained a bunch of weight, but that doesn't happen. I don't know why I remembered that.
Oh,
But
interesting. Yeah.
I had a memory that as they got skinnier, she like got bigger, but that doesn't happen.
Well, there's also this like kind of a little random cannibalism scene where they're all
Right.
eating her. And I thought that worked pretty well as like a metaphor for how much you give to your kids as a mother. But we never really hear the mother's perspective besides that first introduction and then the last intro when she's on the
Right.
train, kind of looking for like the guy with the box to see
The
what's
box
in it.
man.
Yeah. But she also didn't seem overtly worried when her son first started not eating. But, you know, people react in different ways.
Yeah, I don't really know what the theming is supposed to be there, but it's sort of, eerie and interesting, and it does bother me. So the fact that it bothers me, I think that's actually, this was why I wanted to revisit this, because I remembered that thing bothering me. I am not going to go into, I have had health issues in the past where I actually couldn't eat, so it might have just been a triggering thing for me where I know what that's like. But I think it was beyond that. I think it's just like in your bones that even if you don't have children, you have a certain degree of worry about their eating habits and their health.
Exactly. And like maybe like stranger danger as well.
Right.
We never find out what was in the box, which I think is
Right.
great.
Yeah.
I like that
What could
being a
they do?
mystery. This is
Yeah.
probably my favorite of the bunch.
I think it's the best. Yeah. The next part is the birthday party, and this is written by Roxanne Benjamin and Annie Clark, who, as you said, is Saint Vincent, who I admit I don't really know much about other than that she's a famous person. My thing about this one is it stars Melanie Linsky,
She's
who
amazing.
who's she's having a great resurgence because of Yellow Jackets, but I've been a fan of hers since Heavenly Creatures.
Me too.
There was this quickly canceled TV show called Drive that I watched just because she was in it back in the mid 2000s. So I'm really happy that she has a big career now. And this is the funny one. Again, there's always a funny one.
Always a funny one.
She's a mother who's planning, and she's another socialite type, and she's planning a big birthday party for her daughter, and she finds that her husband is dead and has implied that he has killed himself. And instead of reporting this, she tries to cover it up because she wants the birthday party to go off without a hitch. And there are all these little indications of how important status is. There's this great character who shows up and just invites herself to a little girl's birthday party because it's the thing to do that weekend, and the thing that all the cool people, the Keeping Up with the Joneses, you have to go to this little girl's birthday party.
Hmm.
I like that touch. I think it's pretty funny. It's not laugh out loud funny. I think Linsky kind of carries it for the most part.
Yeah, the dialogue seemed like was delivered in a very stilted way,
Yeah,
which I feel like maybe it would work better as a play. There is a play called The Birthday Party, funny enough. But yeah, the music, I assume St. Vincent did the music. I thought that
yeah. I
it
guess I
was
don't
it was
know.
pretty good. And
There's the weird their nanny is just this sort of goth woman, and I was like, is that
yes.
Saint Vincent? I thought, but then it's not. It's just they just decided to have a goth nanny who's kind of sarcastic. It's a strange touch.
Yeah, it all feels very surreal. I'm not sure if it totally worked, but I appreciate, what they tried to do.
The punchline's good. The punchline is that it's not just called the birthday party, it's called the birthday party, or the memory Lucy suppressed from her seventh birthday that wasn't really her mom's fault, even though her therapist says it probably is probably why she fears intimacy.
I thought that was excellent because it's mentioned earlier that Lucy experiences anxiety.
Right.
Melanie Linsky's character experiences anxiety, and they kind of blame Lucy's anxiety on Linsky.
Yeah.
So it worked.
The next part, written directed by Roxanne Benjamin, it's called Don't Fall. I don't know why it's called Don't Fall. It's no good. It's some friends go to the Vasquez Rocks outside of LA. One of them's afraid of everything. She gets possessed by an ancient demon of some type and kills her friends. I don't really get this one. It kind of, I don't
Weirdly, I'm going to be a little bit more generous. I think
know.
I
Okay.
found it probably the most cohesive of all of them, and I would be interested to see a feature. Maybe not this story, but
Yeah,
to see a feature by this director.
yeah. I mean, it could have, even this story could have worked better if there was any sort of real setup. I think, but they're just sort of like, oh, here's some cave paintings, and now you're possessed by something that we don't have any time to explain, or set up in a way that's interesting that we're not explaining it. There's
Yeah, yeah.
a way to do that. And then she just sort of kills them, and it's like it feels like it's over in 5 minutes.
The dynamics of the relationships weren't really established. I didn't know that the stoner and Gretchen were siblings until he was like,
The last second.
like my
Yeah.
sister, that's my sister. We can't just leave her. So I kind of wish that that was done sooner. I just have a feeling that maybe this one was not made for this anthology. The other ones perhaps, but it feels a bit out of place with the others.
Well, when it was announced that it was going to be Kusama, who does the next one, which we'll talk about in a second, Vikovic, a Pet Cemetery director, Mary Herron, and Boxing Helena director, Jennifer Lynch, who's David's daughter.
Mhm.
And Mary Herron and Jennifer Lynch had nothing to do with the final product. So maybe they had a story that they meant to do with one or both of them, and they had to dump it, and then they just threw this thing together, because it really does feel like something that friends shoot over the weekend. They're like, let's go to the rocks.
Yeah, it had that kind of
We got those.
like 2000 early 2000s of like white people traipsing about in like Native American
Mhm.
burial sites.
Right, like it was trying to do like a hostile type
Yeah.
situation. Yeah, yeah, I see. Yeah. And then okay, so last part, her only living son is Karen Kusama, who was probably the best known of these directors. I mean, other than Saint Vincent, who's just not known as a director. But she did Girl Fight and Jennifer's Body, which was that had come out pretty recently and was initially just kind of shat on by critics and audiences, but has really developed into a pretty solid cult following. And then Kusama is also, she did The Initiation, and she did a pretty good drama that I really liked called Destroyer with uh
Nicole Kidman.
oh, okay.
I didn't know you were talking about her. Yeah, Nicole
I
Kidman.
couldn't think of the name. So Nicole Kidman plays, yeah, it's one of those roles that people make fun of where they get quote ugly for the role because they want to win an Oscar.
Mm.
But I liked it. I thought it was a good movie. And then she also directed the pilot for Yellow Jackets and sort of set the precedent for that show, which I quite like. The idea here is kind of Rosemary's Baby meets We Need to Talk About Kevin,
That's
where
yeah, that's a good
yeah,
comparison.
a single mother named Cora, played by Christina Kirk, discovers that her son Andy is a psychopath, and he's ripped the fingers nails out of a fellow student. But when they go to the parent teacher conference, the principal blames the victim and tells Cora that her son is special and doesn't need to be punished. And the polite mailman turns out to be a member of a sort of like she slowly realizes there's a cult around her son that's watching her son, and she keeps referring to his dad as a deadbeat, but that we need to stay away from him. So it's like, well, why do you need to stay away from the deadbeat? Well, they need to stay away from the dad because it's Satan is the thing.
Hmm.
And so there's a really interesting idea here is if what if you remade The Omen, but this time Damien was a school shooter, is maybe not an idea you should make a movie out of, but is at least a really interesting angle to take with The Omen or Rosemary's Baby. I think that the fact that they didn't have a budget really hurts this one. I think it looks like it was shot on iPhones.
Yes, I agree with that. I think this is the best directed. I could see a lot of Kusama's like signature close-ups of faces at the beginning,
Uh-huh.
but they don't really explore the world outside of the domestic space, and I think they really need to. And it's a little confusing because they don't have enough money or time.
It looks very bare and Spartan, and not a way that you think they intended it to look bare and Spartan, because I think it's supposed to be a little more rustic in the town they're living in. But it is a very interesting idea for a story. It's just in the wrong place. But it's not the best of the first one's the best, but it's probably, yeah, you're right, the best directed. Like if they just had the budget, not even for special effects, like the way they end the sort of possession thing is actually very effective, I think, and it costs probably $20, but just the look is just, it looks like iPhones.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. And I'd also like to say it makes sense that maybe they had some other directors in mind because this seemed. Um, I have some problems conflating motherhood and womanhood. It's really perturbing
Mhm.
to me. I love kids, they are the future. I'm not planning on having them. And all of these stories,
Our motherhood,
except for Don't Fall, are motherhood. So
which,
I would
which is almost another reason why Don't Fall doesn't work, because it doesn't fit the theme.
Yeah,
I
I
think.
wish that they had titled it something about mothers instead of
Yeah.
something about women. But, it is what it is. I would be interested in a sequel. I think there are so
Yeah.
many female directors doing great things in the horror genre and female writers. Like I would love to see like Akilah Cooper who did Megan and um
Hmm.
I think
I made a little list too. Yeah,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
yours.
Mine are Chloe Akuno, who did Watcher with Micah
Hmm.
Monroe, um, Amanda Nell Ow. Ooh, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her last name. EU. She did a little movie called Tiger Stripes last year. That was really strong. Zelda Williams, who did Lisa Frankenstein, and Mimi Cave, who did Fresh, and also I think has a Nicole Kidman movie coming out soon.
I'm trying. I just remembered one that I didn't add to my list is the Mexican director who just did True Detective season.
Oh, the one who did La Llorona?
No, she did. We Are
Oh, Tigers Are Not
Tigers.
Afraid. Yes.
Tigers Are Not Afraid.
Another
Um,
Shudder original.
yeah, that would probably my favorite of most of those quote Shutter originals. I really like that movie. Um,
Yeah, she would be great. Isa Lopez.
Isa Lopez, thank you. And then Jennifer Kent, who did the Babadook, who doesn't seem like she wants to work too heavily. She seems like she likes making just a couple movies every once in a while.
She did a great short episode for the Guillermo del Toro
Oh, I haven't
anthology
seen that.
TV show. Her
Okay,
episode was
cool.
great.
I haven't watched any of that yet.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that's good to know. Sadly, Antonio Bird is passed away, but Ravenous is maybe it's not the best horror movie directed by a woman, but it's maybe my favorite horror movie directed by a woman. I love the movie Ravenous. And then I feel like the director of Relic, Natalie Erica James, sorry, that's her full name. I feel like Dooku Mao,
Who did Raw
and
and Titan.
she might be above it at this point because she's like got her can thing for Titan.
Hmm.
And then Caroline Farge, who also has an Oscar nom now, so maybe she's beyond it too.
Yeah.
Maybe there should have been a first movie, and then the second one should have been called XX Motherhood, and then that's the one you put all the mother stories
Oh,
in.
that would be great because there are so many different types of womanhood, right? I would love to see like
Yeah,
a trans woman directing about a trans experience, like there's
yeah.
just so many different angles that you could go off of, and it felt a little boring, the ones that they picked. Not saying that
They
the individual stories were boring, but as an anthology.
that's maybe a strength in it, is that they're very, very standard issue mother stories that didn't have something go wrong. I think the idea behind a lot of it is that to kind of disturb that domestic bliss with something going wrong, and otherwise these. Well, no, I guess in the last one she's a single mother, and there's a very heavy indication that this is a metaphor for abusive husband. And maybe if you had a feature length movie, you could go into that a little more. But yeah, I mean, it's a couple good, three good ideas that just aren't quite pulled off.
Hmm.
But that's all we watched for this one. Is there where can they find you? I think I mentioned it earlier, but where are you on the internets?
Sure. So I'm Chloe's Not Scared everywhere, pretty much. Um, Blue Sky, Instagram, Substack, my website, chloesnotscared.com.
And as usual, you can reach me at the Genre Grinder website, the Genre Grinder Facebook page. I am Gabe Powers on Blue Sky. I am Genre Grinder Gabe on Instagram. And I would like to. Oh, and I'm Gabe Powers, one word on a Letterbox. And I'd like to, as usual, thank my Patreon supporters for helping me cover the cost of the website itself. You guys are great. And until next time, try to avoid talking to creepy tarot card guys with scary German names on a train. It might be the last mistake you make.
Thank you so
Goodbye.
much, Gabe. Bye.
Crypt keepers in the house with a groove that's nasty and mean, like the effects of a guillotine. Permanent headaches, the end of the mission. For you have entered the keeper's terror vision. So everybody.